Andiamo zitti la mano, perché lo stiamo facendo una balla, ma si vede che molla, mi sembra molla per sopra la si vuole la mattina, quando facciamo la mattina, cosa ci può la mattina.
Welcome back to Communicology. Today I want to talk about a subject that might throw you for a little bit of a loop. I want to talk about, is it worth it to go to college? Now, you might be wondering, wait, you're a college professor. Why would you address that, especially in today's world where pretty much, the concept that college is a scam is becoming a very well-known thing. And for the first time, we're actually seeing students, prospective students, on a larger scale saying that maybe college isn't worth it. That's a weird phenomenon because it's always been known that college is worth it. So of course you go to college. But the downside is we have spent way too much time in our society saying that yes, you should. Everyone should go to college. We should make it so everyone should go to college. Today I want to talk about why that's a bad notion and why no, you shouldn't all go to college. Some people shouldn't go to college and some people don't need to go to college, and sometimes college is a bad idea, period. So I want to talk about those kind of things because, it's expensive. It takes a lot of time. And quite frankly, in some cases, it is a scam. So let's talk about those things and move through it. Now, the first thing, is college a good idea? Yes. I mean, the notion of college is a good idea because it's furthering studies. The idea that I could go someplace and sit with people who are learned professionals who can tell me deeper and deeper things about the world, about all these different areas of study, and also hold me to a standard to be able to recitate those things back, to deep think, to create more new work, to write papers, all that kind of fun stuff. Those things are very much still important, and they're very much needed in society because we need people who are deeper thinkers, who are much more wider, brought into the world that we can understand things, to understand how it works. And I'm a product of college, obviously. My undergraduate, a graduate degree, doctoral degree, those are very much important pieces of who I am. But it's also just part of the path that I'm on. I happen to love learning. So it makes sense to go to a place to learn more. Now, do I need to go to college to learn more? Well, no, actually you don't. These things, you could pick them up on your own and buy them and read them on your own. One big benefit of college, though, is that they kind of force you to do it. I mean, really. Would you rather sit on your phone and scroll, or would you rather sit down and open a book? The vast majority of people, like overwhelming majority of people, would rather scroll on their phone. That's what we all do. I'm guilty of it. I've got, not these ones here, but I've got other books that haven't been shelved yet that I would love to get to read. But, there's just times I'll scroll instead, to my own detriment. So again, we have plenty of situations where we can read on our own, yes, but we're not really kind of forced to do it if we do it on our own. So you have to have a strong amount of discipline to say, I want to build my own library. I'm going to get these books. I'm going to read them. I'm going to enjoy them, and I'm going to wrestle with them and all that kind of stuff. The other thing too about college, when it comes to all this reading, is that you get the wrestling, the true wrestling that happens, because you might read it, understand it a certain way, and think that's what it says and what it means, and that's all you know. Whereas your classmate might read it and think something else. The professor might read it and think something else. And so you have that discussion that happens. Well, I think the author means this in this situation, or I think the author means that in this situation. And you start having all kinds of great discussion and interchange with everybody about what's happening in these great works. And we wrestle sometimes with really hard things that maybe the book can flesh out and then springboard to greater conversation that you wouldn't be able to have if you're just reading it on your own. For example, right now when I teach media law, it's one of those things that you can lay out exactly, court cases and all that stuff. But when it comes to wrestling with the ethics of freedom of speech, how far is too far? What should I say? What could I say? Should we have a limit? Those are ethical questions that you wrestle with, and you have your thoughts and your own ideas. Well, What about the person next to you, or the other person on the other side, or the professor? To help facilitate and get all that discussion going to where maybe your decisions and your thoughts are challenged. Again, if you're by yourself, you're not challenging your own thoughts. You're stuck with them. The idea of challenging it is something that comes from a classroom experience. So what about like the idea of, do I need to go to college personally? Well, that's absolutely up to you. I mean, does everyone need to go to college? No. I mean, there are plenty of people that don't need to go to college, and that's perfectly fine. Obviously, you hear people typically break it down along blue collar versus white collar type of things. Like, well, if you're going to be a plumber or an electrician, carpenter, you don't need to go to college. You can go to a trade school, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're doing these white collar things, then yes, go to college. But that's not always the same split either. My point where I draw that line of whether you should or shouldn't is the idea of, again, if it's broken down to your own personal determination. If I want to go to do a thing and I'm dying to do a thing, well, then just go do the thing. Like, for example, I also teach a lot of video production and things like that. You can teach yourself video production. You can easily go find a place that's doing video production and work for them. Now, typically one fallacy that comes into play with college is we tend to think, I started at college, I went through college, ergo, as soon as I'm done with college, I start up here, like in a management position. It's like, no. You start down here. Now, if you don't have college, you might actually start down here. So like you go work for a place and say, I want to learn this trade. I'm really passionate about it. I would like to learn it. So whether the trade's, carpentry or photography or business, just jump in and try it. Find a place that will bring you under their wing and just teach you. But you'll probably have to start down here. But you learn and learn and learn and learn and learn and learn as you go through the up the rungs of the ladder. The problem with slotting in up here is there's all this knowledge that you don't have. Well, I went to college, I have book smarts. But book smarts don't always fill in this gap. And that becomes problematic. So then you become arrogant. And worse, you become arrogant and you don't know the stuff to back it up. So you're falsely arrogant. It's one thing to be cocky because you know stuff, but it's another thing to be cocky because you think you know stuff and actually you really don't. So I look at your own personal motivation. So if you're just dying to get into something, just go try to get into it. So if you can find a place that'll bring you under wing, just do that. And that's sometimes a lot easier to get. Now, some jobs, of course, require credentialing. Like, you can't just become a doctor. No one's going to like, okay, we'll train you how to do brain surgery. That's not how that works, obviously. But most of your other kind of things that you see out in the world, a lot of things from business. You look at like some of the great business leaders of the world. A lot of them didn't go to school for business. They just started a business. So, like, I know, like when I was 12, I was delivering papers. That's one of those things that helps you learn time management, money management, all kinds of other things, budgeting. You start learning all these things, customer relations, public relations, all of these different things you start to learn, and you start figuring out what's the best way to make your route through a neighborhood. So you learn distribution, and you learn all these different things just by having a paper route. Now, those jobs, of course, are pretty well long gone, like newspapers. So then the next thing is, well, what about this other thing I want to do? So if you want to be, like in my world, you want to be a videographer, a photographer, something like that, well, find someone who shoots weddings, and say, I'd like to learn more about this. Can I tag along? I'll even volunteer to do it. Now that's like, well, wait a minute, I want to make money. But sometimes to get in, you need to do it. It's like, if I can volunteer for you for a month and you're happy with the way I'm working, would you hire me? That's a way in. Well, but don't I need a degree? I mean, no, you don't need a degree. Again, we have this problem in our country with the idea of credentialing. We've talked about that in a previous podcast. But just because like someone thinks you need to be credentialed doesn't mean you actually have to. Your knowledge is what carries the day. Your experience is what carries the day. So if you can go learn something and you're willing to learn, and put things aside, that playtime is aside, it's time to learn. And you have that self-motivation, that self-drive, it works and it will work. Now, it might take a while to build up that ladder, but you're also going to build up that ladder without being $100,000, $200,000 in debt. So, I mean, there's a trade-off. Which do you want to wrestle with, and which one would you rather have? College, though, it is one of those things that really is helpful, especially one if you don't have that motivation, if you need someone to force you. Like, you will read this book, you will spit out answers on a test, you will write a paper, you will make a video project, you will do this, you will do that. Someone to force you and keep you accountable. College does that. It's an expensive way to keep you accountable, but it works. The other huge benefit of college, and me, I've mentioned, I love the liberal arts. I come from the liberal arts tradition. So the idea that to know a lot about everything and how it interconnects, that's the heart of the liberal arts. So you can go to a liberal arts college, you can go to a practitioner college. Practitioner college is going to be heavier on the idea of learning the pieces of that trade, much more in depth to that trade, learning all the ins and outs and nooks and crannies of that trade. And there's real benefit to learning that way. I preferred the liberal arts method because I think that, just like the ancient Greeks thought, if you learn a little bit about everything, you're going to be much more of a well-rounded thinker, because you learn some history, you learn some art, you learn communication, you learn English, you learn geometry, you learn geography, and you learn all these things, and you see how the world all interrelates. And it also unlocks different areas of your mind and exercises it like a muscle, So you have all these areas that are unlocked and exercised, and your brain is much more ready to rock and roll and function whenever things come your way. So the person who doesn't have college, who works up and has all kinds of experience, they've seen things and they can react to certain things, but they're stuck in that skill set of what they've kind of learned over time. So whatever their experience has guided them through, that's it. Someone who goes to a practitioner school has a lot of book smarts about how you can and can't do things within your trade. Someone who has a liberal arts education has a much broader thought. So if the industry goes sideways, now they can think and interact and react, with a greater mindset than the person who's in their little silo. Now, as far as the idea of a college being a scam, well, where that comes into play is, obviously it's very expensive. Colleges have gotten so expensive. And one of the biggest problems with colleges is administrative bloat. That's where you end up seeing colleges explode. Like, you'll see a lot of times people point at professors, and it used to be that way. You go back into the 80s and 90s, too many professors making too much money to do too little work. And that was common. But we're now in this new, in the 2000s, we've seen administrators way outpace faculty, to the point where you've got like vice presidents galore, and then you've got deans galore. You've got all of these different layers and strata of management and sub-management, all these other people before you even get into the regular staff and then the faculty. And then when you create all these new VPs, each one of them has to have a department under them full of secretaries, full of managers, assistant managers, everything else, and all the other support staff. So where you used to just have like maybe a president, a provost, and like 3 or 4 deans, and maybe a vice president over top of all the operations, and then some management, and then everybody else. It's now exploded to where you have just, you have president, you have tons of vice presidents, associate vice presidents, assistant vice presidents, and then you have deans and associate deans and assistant deans. And I worked at a college once that had a provost who's the chief over all the the faculty, but they also had 3 associate provosts. It's like a school of 1,000 students and had 3 associate provosts. Why? Talk about an extremely expensive proposition. Surely there's some support staff that could have done that instead. In fact, most colleges I've ever taught at, it was support staff that did these, but the people who did that work were at the rank of associate provost. So they're pulling in 6 figures per person plus their support staff. It's like, holy smokes, that's a lot of money. So you can see where the thought of a college being a scam. The other problem when people start talking about college being a scam is they're talking about how college model has changed a lot over the past 30, 40, 50 years from education to indoctrination. And that's a real issue in American college campus today, because you can't just say, I want to go learn communication. Well, before we talk about communication, let me tell you about how awful Trump is. And that's what you see in a lot of classes. I've had fellow faculty say, I can't get students to take my classes. They won't take my classes. It's like, that's because you're rabidly biased and you can't keep your mouth shut when it comes to politics. And why would they take your class? You know, you berate their families, you berate them, you berate their president. They like the president and you bash them all the time. Why would they want to sit in a room like that? You know, maybe you could try teaching your subject. Wow, this is too important, I have to speak up. Well, then get used to having small class sizes and maybe losing your job, which is more important. But the idea of I need to train up the next group to be as activist as I am, it's like, why? Let people be their own people. My duty is to teach communication. So my job, my duty, my responsibility, starts up here with academia in general. So it's my job to be a representative for academia, the whole scope of academia across the world. And then from there, I move down to my discipline. So I've got responsibility to the discipline of communication and what it, how it's taught, how it continues to move forward, and how people continue to study communication and what that matters. Then from there, I move to my institution, my university where I teach. So my responsibility is to make sure my university is healthy, that communication is taught well at my university. And then from there, I move down to my academic area, which is the humanities. And then from there, my department of communication from within there. And then my colleagues who teach with me. So you can see there's multiple layers, but at the end of the day, I've got to be true to my discipline. I have to be true to academia. And it doesn't matter who's president or what my political views are or my religious views are or whatever else comes into play with that kind of thing. My duty is to my discipline and to academia. Now, as a Christian, of course, ultimately my duty is to God and to truth as God has created it. But from just a purely practice standpoint, my job is to make sure that my discipline is well covered and well represented. Colleges have lost sight of that. And you can hop online and find story after story after story after story of professors who are horribly biased and berated, belittled, slandered their own students for daring to have the wrong opinion, the wrong opinion. I don't, my students don't know my politics, as they shouldn't. I'm not here to teach about politics. I'm here to not teach about one side of politics. I'm here to teach about communication. So I try to focus on communication. Now, when you're looking for colleges, how do I know which one's the scam college and which one's the real college? Good question. I mean, a lot of it is walking into that space. When you go on campus tours, they love when you go on campus tours because they curate it. They steer you this way, steer you this way. They go to the choice buildings that look pretty. They go to the choice professors who can maybe look, and say the right things at the right time. Maybe you meet the campus president who's very fluent in politics as far as saying the right words at the right time, and you think, oh wow, this is a good place. Don't do that. Visit a college on their off time. Walk through campus. Listen to students talk, how they talk to each other. Weave your way through some of the classroom buildings and look at the bulletin boards. Look at the clubs and groups that are out there, and you'll find out real quick what's going on at that campus by looking at their billboards and what they put as important in that campus life. Go online and look up the course catalog. Sometimes they'll be called a college catalog. Sometimes the course catalog, the university catalog, but they'll have all of the courses that are offered by that school. And just start reading and seeing what kind of courses are offered. Are they hitting the classics that you would expect you would see in a liberal arts education? Or do you see crazy, wild, horribly biased things? Or stupid, wasted time things like the traditional underwater basket weaving type of class that people joke about? What are you seeing when you look at the course catalog? Are you seeing courses that are legitimately useful? Then go online and look at the offices. Go look at the administrative offices. How many presidents and vice presidents and assistant vice presidents do they have? And what offices do they have? So if you start seeing something that's super top heavy with all kinds of wacko jacko different titles and things that are all over the place, you probably need to run. And if you're looking for some place that's not crazy, again, you got to have really good eyes like a hawk, because a lot of times they've they've gone to rename things. Like you've seen a lot of universities, a lot of states who have said you're not allowed to have DEI offices anymore. They still exist. They just changed the name. So you'll go to a college, and you'll see this in state colleges and private colleges. You'll see them secular, and you'll see them in Christian colleges. You'll see offices of diversity. They might not call it that, but they'll call it something else, and they'll hide it. And I've had people at a private Christian college that I worked with who blatantly said, yeah, we hid that as soon as we had to. So you think that, oh, that's just like some state school. No, it's even in Christian colleges too. It doesn't matter where you go. You're going to find that kind of thing. So when you're looking and shopping for colleges, you have to be mindful and be wide open and then listen, look. And colleges will tell you who they are if you just listen to that kind of thing. But as far as it being a scam, again, it comes down to what's your own personal motivation. What do you want to study? What do you want to do? And where do you want to go? And what do you want to do with your life? And it's one of those things it's complicated. It is. And it's going to take time and effort to figure that out. And sometimes it's good just to take a year off and take that, what they call a gap year. Just take a year off and try to get your bearings and then step into college. But ultimately, don't feel pressured you have to go to a college or that you have to go to college in general or any specific college or study any particular thing. What do you want to do? Take some time and think about that. And then what are my ways into doing that? How can I get there? Don't think there's only one way. There are multiple ways. Take your time and think that through. That's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thank you for hanging around this long anyway. But we'll see you next time on Communicology.